car in the middle of the night, and two friends who never made it back.
There is not much time on this earth. At the time, it was just another message. One line in a conversation between two young people trying to navigate a relationship that had become increasingly complicated. Nobody could have known that years later, those words would be examined in court, discussed in documentaries, and debated by people across the country. What began as a relationship between teenagers would eventually become the focus of one of Ohio's most closely followed criminal cases. Not because there was a mystery about who was involved, but because there was a deeper question that investigators spent years trying to answer. How did a relationship documented through thousands of messages become the center of a case that continues to divide opinion today? To find that answer, investigators reviewed an extraordinary amount of evidence: text messages, social media activity, witness interviews, digital records, surveillance footage, and a timeline that would be reconstructed piece by piece. At the center of that story were three young people: Mackenzie Shirilla, Dominic Russo, and Davian Flanagan. This is the story of an investigation, the evidence that shaped it, and the questions that remain long after the case appeared to be settled. Strongsville, Ohio, a suburb of Cleveland. Population roughly 46,000. Crime rate well below the national average. On July 31, 2022, that sense of safety shattered. In the early morning hours, a car carrying three young people crashed into a brick wall at a speed approaching 100 miles per hour. Two of the occupants, 19-year-old Dominic Russo and 20-year-old Davian Flanagan, were killed on impact. The driver, 17-year-old Mackenzie Shirilla, survived. Initial reports treated it as a tragic accident. A young driver, late at night, lost control. But this story would not follow that script. Within months, prosecutors would allege something that transformed the narrative entirely: that the crash was not an accident at all, that Mackenzie Shirilla had driven into that wall intentionally. Before her name became synonymous with a notorious criminal case, Mackenzie Shirilla was known for her social media presence. 17 years old, ambitious, wanted to be an influencer. Her online feed was curated and polished: fashion posts, posed photographs, glimpses of a teenager who seemed to have everything figured out. But those who knew her described a young woman of contradictions, confident in some settings, deeply insecure in others, someone who craved attention and validation. Her relationship history followed a pattern: intense attachments, dramatic breakups, quick reconciliations. Dominic Russo was the opposite: 19 years old, close with his family, his mother Christine and father Frank. Friends describe him as loyal, grounded, the kind of person who made people feel comfortable just by being in the room. He had plans for a career, a family, a future he actually thought about in specifics. Davian Flanagan was 20, an athlete, deeply connected to his community. His father, Scott Flanagan, has spoken publicly about his son with a clarity and heartbreak that's impossible to ignore. Friends describe someone who lit up a room. He got into that car as a passenger and had no control over what happened next. To understand what happened, you have to understand the relationship between Mackenzie and Dominic. They met as young people do. What began as a typical high school romance deepened into something more intense and more destructive. The pattern was unmistakable: together, then fractured, then reconciled. Each cycle more consuming than the last. Friends expressed concern. Family noticed Dominic seemed stressed, distracted. But what made this case different was the data. When investigators extracted the contents of both phones, they found thousands of messages documenting the relationship in real time. Three themes emerged. First, control messages dictating behavior, expressing ownership. Second, escalation arguments that went from casual to catastrophic within minutes. Third, the cycle: breakup, silence, reconciliation, promises that never lasted. And there was something else: threads of communication suggesting the relationship had crossed from difficult to dangerous, allusions to previous incidents. When reconstructed later, They formed a pattern that pointed toward something far more serious than teenage drama. Looking back, there were signs. Friends later told investigators about arguments that escalated beyond anything normal. Driving disputes, moments when Mackenzie's behavior behind the wheel frightened passengers. Family members had concerns they either expressed or kept to themselves. No single person saw the complete picture. That's how these things work. In the 72 hours before the crash, something shifted. The relationship was in an off phase, or at least, that's how Dominic seemed to view it. The messages from those final days carried a weight earlier exchanges hadn't, an undercurrent of something unresolved. On the evening of July 30, a gathering took place at a home in Strongsville. Mackenzie was there. Dominic was there. Davian was there. Witnesses describe a night that was mostly unremarkable until the atmosphere shifted. People began to leave. In the early morning hours of July 31, the three got into a car together. Mackenzie was driving, Dominic in the passenger seat, Davian in the back. At approximately 5:30 a.m., the car accelerated to nearly 100 miles per hour and drove directly into a brick wall. When first responders arrived, what they found defied easy explanation. Dominic Russo was dead. Davian Flanagan was dead. Mackenzie Shirilla was extracted and hospitalized with serious but survivable injuries. The road where the crash occurred was not a highway. Hitting a visible commercial building at that speed, at that angle, required either catastrophic inattention or something else. The vehicle's event data recorder told the story. In the seconds before impact, the accelerator was fully depressed. Speed climbed to nearly 100 miles per hour, and critically, there was no evidence of braking, no steering away, no panicked correction. Surveillance footage corroborated the data. The car accelerated along a straight road and struck the wall without any apparent attempt to avoid it. The reconstruction answered what happened. The question was why. And look, if this case is hitting you the same way it hit us, hit subscribe. This is the kind of story that sticks with you, and we go deep on cases just like this one. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. The investigation broke into 3 components. Digital forensics. The phones became the centerpiece. Experts extracted texts, social media activity, and deleted messages stretching back months. What emerged was a chronicle of a relationship that had become increasingly volatile. Vehicle forensics. Examiners found no mechanical issues. No brake failure, no steering malfunction. The crash was the result of human action. Witness interviews. Dozens of people were interviewed. Friends from the party, family members who had observed the relationship, acquaintances who had witnessed concerning incidents. The turning point came when investigators overlaid the crash data with the message timeline. Communications from the days before the crash, when read alongside the vehicle data, painted a picture of intent, references to the relationship ending, statements that suggested finality. The investigation took months. When it was complete, the conclusion was clear. The crash was not an accident. Mackenzie Shirilla was charged with multiple counts of murder plus felonious assault. She waived her right to a jury trial. The case would be decided by Judge Nancy Margaret Russo alone, no relation to Dominic. The prosecution built its case on 3 pillars. First, the crash data acceleration to nearly 100 miles per hour with no braking or evasion. Second, the relationship evidence, thousands of messages documenting volatility, control, and desperation. The prosecution argued Dominic was trying to end the relationship, and Mackenzie had decided if she couldn't have him, nobody would. Third, the timeline, communications converging with behavior that suggested planning. The defense faced a difficult task. They pointed to Mackenzie's traumatic brain injury and memory loss from the crash. They raised the possibility of a medical emergency, a seizure, a loss of consciousness. And they argued that turbulent teenage relationships are common, that intense messages don't equal murderous intent. The trial lasted several days. The decision rested with one person. On August 21, 2023, Judge Russo delivered her verdict, guilty on all counts. The crash, she found, was not an accident. It was not impairment or medical emergency. It was a deliberate act. Christine Russo, Dominic's mother, delivered a victim impact statement that left the courtroom in tears. She spoke about her son's laugh, his dreams, the future stolen from him. Scott Flanagan spoke about Davian with dignity, about the person he was becoming, about what it means to lose a child to violence. Mackenzie Shirilla was sentenced to 2 concurrent terms of 15 years to life. She will be in her 30s before any chance at parole. Her legal team filed appeals arguing about evidence admissibility and the interpretation of the crash data. The appeals were denied. The conviction stood. In 2024, Netflix released The Crash, bringing the case to millions more viewers. The reaction was intense and divided. Some saw clear-cut murder. Others questioned whether intent had truly been proven. For the families, there is no afterward, only the ongoing reality of loss. The Russos have channeled their grief into advocacy, speaking publicly about relationship violence, pushing for awareness and education. Discussions of Dom's law represent a legacy they are determined to build. The Flanagans have focused on preserving Davian's memory through community initiatives, ensuring he is remembered as a complete person, not a secondary character in someone else's tragedy. The Shirilla family has maintained support for Mackenzie throughout. Their position is uniquely isolating. They have lost a daughter to the prison system, while 2 other families have lost sons to the grave. Dominic Russo was 19. Davian Flanagan was 20. Mackenzie Shirilla was 17 when she drove that car into a wall. She will be in her 30s before any chance at parole, older than either of them ever got to be. The case is, in the eyes of the law, settled. The verdict stands. The appeals were denied. But the questions it raised about relationships, about control, about how we determine intent, about the line between tragedy and crime, those remain open. There is no satisfying ending here, only reflection. How ordinary moments become extraordinary tragedies. How relationships that seem normal can conceal patterns that are anything but. And how, when the worst happens, the search for answers takes us into territory where the truth is harder to find than anyone expects.